Good evening, I'm Klaudia Czerwińska and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. This will be NATO's moment of truth. The alliance summit begins tomorrow. With each passing hour, new challenges arise as the pressure is mounting in the Middle East and is now involving the West, while the unity of the alliance is in question. More on that in just a moment, but before we dive in, let's take a look at tonight's headlines. Another massive attack on Kyiv takes place, leading to widespread destruction and rising death toll. The Strait of Hormuz is absolutely vital to global trade, and now Iran threatens to close it. And first woman and first African officially takes the post of the head of the International Olympic Committee. But first, let's start with the breaking news. Iran has retaliated for Sunday's U.S. strikes on its nuclear facilities, unleashing 6 missiles at the American Udeid airbase in Qatar, as well as targeting a U.S. base in Iraq. Qatari authorities confirmed that the attack caused no injuries or casualties. Explosions were reportedly heard near the Qatari capital, Doha. Reuters reports that air defense systems deployed to cover the Al Udeid base were in operation. U.S. and other personnel had been earlier evacuated from the location. Air defenses were also activated at the Ain al-Assad American Air Base in Iraq. Iran threatened to retaliate against the United States after Washington dropped 30,000-pound bunker busters on the country's underground nuclear installations over the weekend. U.S. President Donald Trump has openly raised the possibility of the Iranian government being toppled. This will be one of the most important summits for the collective security of the continent and potentially the world. Bringing 45 leaders together, the NATO summit commencing in The Hague on Tuesday will take place as uncertainty grows, with the conflict ballooning in the Middle East. The main goal of the meeting, however, is to ensure Donald Trump remains satisfied with increased defense spending within the alliance, with a draft declaration leaked to TVP World proposing countries could commit to meeting of that goal by 2032. So is this the moment of truth for NATO? Our chief political correspondent, Aaron Damon, went looking for an answer.
It's being regarded as the largest security operation in Dutch history, The Hague readying itself for power and politics.
We are an alliance where we fight together and, if necessary, where we also suffer and die together for our collective defense.
Some 45 heads of state, including US President Donald Trump, are expected to touch down for the annual NATO summit, which will kick off on Tuesday before the leaders themselves sit down for roughly 2 to 3 hours on Wednesday morning, and they will have plenty to discuss.
The most significant and direct threat facing this alliance remains the Russian Federation. Iran should not have its hands on a nuclear weapon. So, and I would not agree that this is against international law what the US did.
In the Middle East, tensions have boiled over in recent weeks, Israel and Iran exchanging missile strikes and the US launching an attack on Iran's nuclear sites. All the while, Russian leader Vladimir Putin is watching to see how it all shakes down for Moscow.
Not in a critical way, but in a small way. This impact on Iran is going to further limit Putin being able to carry out his bluster.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met with King Charles and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer in London on Monday, before reports suggest he will join an informal dinner at The Hague on Tuesday evening. Comes as the aerial assaults on Kyiv continue.
I felt this explosion. There were bricks on me. There was something in my mouth. It was total hell. I woke up in the rubble.
Since returning to the White House, President Trump has pushed NATO members to ramp up defence spending, laying down a 5% GDP target. In fact, a summit declaration has already been drafted, with a copy leaked to TVP World, proposing countries hit that goal by 2032 through an allocation of 3.5% of GDP for core defence and 1.5% to protect critical infrastructure. All indications point to most leaders being on board, except for the likes of Spain, which claims to have negotiated an exemption.
NATO's going to have to deal with Spain. Spain's been a very low payer. They were always a very low payer.
At the same time, the strength of NATO's security guarantee has faced questions, including whether America would indeed come to the aid of a fellow member country in the event of an attack.
Being a democratic alliance where leaders change has always given it a basis of renewal. That said, at the current time, it is a critical juncture.
Earlier this month, TVP World spoke exclusively with former NATO chief spokesperson Oana Lungescu, who made no bones over the future of the alliance.
Is this NATO's moment of truth?
Yeah, it's an important moment in NATO's history where we will see, I'm sure, Europeans stepping up to the plate. We'll see Americans recommitting to the alliance.
Back at The Hague, hundreds of protesters took to the streets over the weekend, railing against NATO and rising military spending. A reminder of the delicate dance diplomats face at a testing time for Europe and the globe. Aaron Darman, TVP World.
As European leaders prepare for the high-stakes NATO meeting in The Hague, their foreign ministers met in Brussels to discuss the escalating violence in the Middle East and attempt to carve out a common European response. Our correspondent Alex Cadier was at the meeting and now joins me from The Hague ahead of the NATO summit. So, good evening, Alex. We've seen Iran dominating discussions today, but what can we expect in the coming days as Donald Trump and his European counterparts come face to face?
Well, good evening, Claudia. What we've seen in the last few hours with that meeting of the European foreign ministers may be a very small version, a very small predictor of what's to come, and therefore what those European powers will have to prepare for at this NATO summit. The goal of the foreign ministers meeting earlier today was actually to talk about Israel's actions in Gaza and to talk about Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Instead, of course, the headlines were grabbed by the US action in Iran, and doubtless, as you said at the top of the show, will now be dominated by Iran's retaliation. And therefore, it begs the question, what does Europe do when the US looks the other way? But clearly there was a clear European position. We heard that from the Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski on his way out of the meeting. Let's have a listen to what he said.
The European Union did what was necessary. It warned Iran that it's playing with fire. Now, if it wants to have a nuclear program like Poland, then uranium enrichment was not necessary for that. And that if it wants to avoid a strike, Iran should agree to abandon enrichment.
So clearly that message from Radosław Sikorski is the broad European position. But as I said, this was not the main topic on the agenda for those European powers. They wanted to talk about Israel and Gaza. They wanted to keep that focus on Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine with those fatalities just in the last 24 hours in Kyiv. And again, it begs the question, what happens when the US looks the other way and is no longer as invested in Europe? Well, the answer from Donald Trump, the answer from the NATO summit is Europe will have to invest far more in itself. That 5% target you heard in Aaron Darman's report, Spain effectively exempting itself, saying, we're not that interested. I spoke to the Spanish defense minister a few weeks ago and she said, look, we can do what we need to do with 2%. That will set up an almighty fight in the coming days. Claudia?
Definitely a lot of questions ahead of the summit, and we will be bringing more answers. Thank you so much. That was Alex Cadier reporting live from The Hague. It was impossible to look at, said the witnesses of another ruthless overnight attack on Ukraine. A Russian mass missile and drone attack on Kyiv has killed at least 9 people and wounded 33, continuing Russia's bloody streak. To learn more about the scope of the latest attack, we are now connecting live with our correspondent, Oz Kataji, who is at the site of the attack. Good evening, Oz. Is the rescue operation still ongoing? What can you give us more when it comes to the details of this latest attack?
Well, as you may be able to see behind me, search and rescue operations are still underway. 9 people killed in the Kyiv region. That was 8 at the scene behind me in the Shevchensky district of Kyiv, and 1 other in the wider Kyiv Oblast area. Now, one of the victims in this attack was a mother. However, their child is still believed to be under the rubble. So that's why search and rescue operations are still underway deep into the evening. Now, the Ukrainian government say Russia launched 352 drones and 16 missiles at the territory of Ukraine in this attack. Air defense was working above the skies of Kyiv for about 3.5 hours last night. So a very difficult night for the Ukrainian Air Force. It didn't end there, though. Russia continued to attack throughout the day, attacking in the Odessa region, in the Belgorod, Dnistrovsky area, hitting a school with a ballistic missile. 2 people killed and 12 others wounded there. So a really difficult day as Zelensky visits London to try and drum up more support for Ukraine. Air defense is a crucial issue with these attacks. Russia launching 300, 400 drones at Ukraine with regularity. So the need for air defense missiles is really, really vital here in Ukraine at the moment. However, with much of the attention diverted to the Middle East, there is a worry here that they're not going to receive the kind of resources and support they need under these kinds of difficult attacks, as you'll see, really impacting the lives of Ukrainian civilians, Claudia.
So much. That was Oz Kataji reporting to us live from Kyiv. The U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities came with economic consequences as oil prices surged immediately. Iran's threat to close the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point for 20% of global oil, could further shake global markets by disrupting supply chains. How might this volatile situation affect Poland, Ukraine, as well as Europe more broadly? More in Jan Kennedy's feature report.
Oil prices surged on Monday morning after the U.S. attack on Iran's nuclear facilities. At one point, the price of benchmark Brent crude rose to the highest level since January. However, prices later eased and markets overall reacted with relative calm.
Most investors are relatively relaxed about the situation and their assessment of the situation. Only if there is a dramatic increase in the level of escalation, a dramatic expansion of the conflict, would the stock markets comment on this with sell-offs.
But one potential decision, however, could turn the market on its head. In response to the attack, the Iranian parliament voted and approved plans to close the Strait of Hormuz, pending approval from the country's Security Council for the first time ever. Located between Iran and Oman, the Strait of Hormuz is one of the most important oil shipping routes in the world. About 20% of global oil passes through it. If it gets blocked, the ripple effects could send oil prices up to triple digits.
If it will be conducted by Iran, it will probably launch the prices of oil to the level we haven't seen for a long time. I believe it may even reach the level of $100 for a barrel for Brent. But right now it's only a scenario, a black scenario, I would say.
A scenario which would also affect Poland and other countries in the region.
We will also receive some higher costs of our fuel. Not a massive, I believe, right now. But if the Hormuz will be blocked, it will be much more dangerous also for the Polish market, I believe.
With fears of global instability mounting, officials from Europe and beyond are calling for de-escalation.
Ministers are very much focused on the diplomatic solution and also the concerns of retaliation and this war escalating are huge. Especially closing of the Strait of Hormuz by Iran is something that it would be extremely dangerous and not good for anybody.
China calls on all parties to step up efforts to de-escalate tensions and prevent regional turmoil that could have a greater impact on global economic development.
The matter is of massive importance for Asia and its biggest economy. China would be especially susceptible to a supply disruption, but the ripple effect would spill over to the global market.
The world is a connected system, so when there's missing of oil in Asia, you have to find it somewhere else, and it makes the oil prices on the whole globe much more expensive.
The world is holding its breath, hopeful that an oil crisis can be averted. For TVP World, Jan Kennedy.
Saturday marked an important day for Serhiy Tsikhanouski and 13 journalists released after years of imprisonment for their fight against the Belarusian regime. But many, including Polish-Belarusian journalists, Andrzej Poczobut, remain in custody with their rights violated daily. So when might we see more prominent figures released? Sasha Farbach explores this question in his report.
These are scenes of effusive joy and elation after 5 years of darkness and torture. One of Belarus's main opposition figures and political threats to the regime, Sergei Tikhanovsky, was released on Saturday along with 13 other political prisoners. The fate of many others remains precarious, however, including that of Andrzej Poczobut, an ethnic Polish journalist who has endured over 4 years of imprisonment under inhumane conditions.
We really expect to see Andrzej Poczobut, but we know that Andrzej Poczobut is one of the personal enemies of Alexander Lukashenko, and I know that Lukashenko is demanding a very high price from Poles and Americans on releasing Andrzej Poczobut.
Andrzej Poczobut, detained since March 25, 2021, was sentenced to 8 years in prison in February of 2023 on politically motivated charges. He has endured harsh conditions, including solitary confinement, denial of heart medication, and loss of family visits. Experts say Poczobut in particular has been singled out for harsh treatment by the Minsk regime's strongman.
The story of Andrzej Poczobut is a story of political duel between Alexander Lukashenko himself and Andrzej Poczobut as one of the most brave and strong political prisoners and journalists behind the bars. He is winning a kind of psychological fight with Lukashenko because Lukashenko and his regime, they are forcing Andrzej Poczobut to agree that he is guilty, and when he signed that he is guilty, he can be released. But for Andrzej Poczobut, it's a principal position not to accept his guiltiness because he is not guilty.
For opposition figures like Svetlana Tikhanovskaya and experts alike, the key to breakthroughs in future prisoner releases lies with the White House.
Of course, as has already been repeatedly proven today, President Trump has enough power, strength, and leverage to free all the people in a very short time.
Since Trump is back to the White House, there are very active efforts from official Minsk side, from Lukashenko regime side, and from Washington side, and also from the side of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. We have kind of triangle, active efforts to activate Belarusian issue on international agenda. So we have new administration in Washington and new policy.
The release of the 14 prisoners offers hope, but experts warn Lukashenko could exploit it to ease sanctions or secure other concessions.
For Lukashenko, these political prisoners are a kind of currency to talk to the West and to receive something for himself, recognition, legitimization, cancelling of sanctions, maybe some business contracts.
Although Tikhanovsky's release was unexpected and did not include prominent detainees like Polish journalist Poczobut, experts acknowledge the Polish government's ongoing and past efforts in the negotiations.
General Kellogg met Tikhanovskaya a few months before he visited Belarus and met Lukashenko. This is important. And it was possible thanks to the Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski. He was kind of mediator between them.
For now, moments like these bring joy and hope to families of the thousands still in prison in Belarus, many yearning to also share such moments in the near future. Sasha Farbach, TVP World.
Christy Coventry has officially been appointed the next president of the International Olympic Committee. Coventry is not only the first female and the first African to hold the post, but also a decorated Olympian herself. As she comes into office, a pressing question arises as to whether Russia will be allowed to compete in the Olympics after years of being disqualified for its ruthless and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. Sonia Gatabishchan has more on what to expect in her latest report.
Keys to the Olympic House. A handover between the outgoing president of the International Olympic Committee, Thomas Bach, and the incoming president, Kirsty Coventry, happened on Monday in Lausanne.
I am really honored that I get to walk this journey with you.
Kirsty Coventry of Zimbabwe is the first woman and the first African to hold the position.
She has lifted our flag high.
It does bring a lot of change and recognition of our women locally, maybe internationally as well.
Zimbabwe's former sports minister Coventry is also a 7-time Olympic swimming medalist herself, of which 2 were gold.
As an Olympian, she knows what it means to live the Olympic values.
Among those that congratulated Coventry on being elected for the post in March was also Russian President Vladimir Putin, begging the question if Russian athletes will compete in future Olympic Games.
We don't know for certain what Coventry's strongest position is, but we do know absolutely that she is much more for inclusion of the Russian and Belarusian athletes than her predecessor Thomas Bach was.
Coventry indicated she was generally against banning countries from the Games over conflict. She also said she was considering setting up a task force that would develop guidelines on how to approach conflict-related scenarios.
I believe at the end of the day we need to do anything and everything to protect and support athletes from all conflict areas. We have numerous conflicts and a number of them happening on my continent.
At the 2024 Paris Olympics, Russians and Belarusians were only allowed to compete as neutrals, as the Kremlin was punished for the 2022 invasion of Ukraine and Minsk for its support. The Russian sports minister said that Moscow would insist on full reinstatement. For TVP World, I'm Sonia Gatabishchan.
The current geopolitical and military situations create a particular pressure cooker environment where things happen and could escalate quickly. What better way to respond than a NATO summit, which is set to begin in The Hague on Tuesday, June 24th. On the eve of the summit, Diane Francis, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, joins me now to discuss what lies ahead. Good evening, and thank you for joining me on the program.
You're welcome.
So we've seen Iran retaliating. Al Udeid was American base, was attacked in Qatar. The escalation in the Middle East is definitely affecting the overall security landscape. And there is a potential for this conflict to spill over. We have the meeting taking place. Do you think that NATO is going to actually address it in more detail? And is there a potential for NATO to get actually involved?
NATO shouldn't get involved, although Europe, the European Union, as Mr. Rutte said in his press conference, is very much within range of trouble should Iran decide to get even more frisky with its missile shooting. So, yes, it is of concern. And Iran's misbehavior over the years has also damaged Europe in as much as it's driven something like 20 million refugees out of Syria and other parts of the Middle East, many of whom ended up in Europe. And, you know, that dislocation has been a little troublesome and disruptive, obviously, and expensive for Europe.
We recently heard about Spain trying to opt out of the mandatory 5% GDP spending. Do you think that this is a clear signal that there might be some sort of a break in the fabric of the alliance, of the NATO alliance? What's your opinion on that?
Well, that's a good question. There's a couple of things in there. Obviously, Poland has led the pack, and Britain has done well, in France, our nuclear powers. But Poland's led the pact because, you know, it's right there. It's in the neighborhood of where the war is going on, and it's next. You know, should Russia conquer Ukraine, the further away you get from the Eastern Front in Europe, the less interest there is on it. And Spain, of course, is about as far away as a European country can get from it. Canada's further, but and you know, I think it's very unfortunate they're opting out. I think that's very poor form. If you're in a political military alliance, you should pull your weight. And if they get a carve out, I think that's fine. You don't want them to leave or anything. But I think maybe everybody should cancel their holidays to Spain in protest. I mean, I think it's poor form.
And as we're speaking of this exemption when it comes to the 5% GDP spending for Spain, if member states are considering actually opting out from collectively taking that burden and taking the risk of investing in its defense and bumping up that to 5%, what is the future of Article 5? Because is it possible that Article 5 could be introduced and actually if other member states would be called upon to respond, they would have the skin in the game if they're already thinking of pushing back and opting out of having increased defense spending?
Well, that's really the ball game. It's an alliance, and there are rules, and everybody should pull their weight. And if Spain doesn't want to pull its weight, I think there should be some consequences, or certainly shaming I think that's really unfortunate. Now, all that being said, 5% is a big burden. And if you're far away from the fighting, like Spain is, I guess you'd say it's hard for them to sell politically. But on the other hand, I think they should pull their weight because Spain has other issues regarding security that NATO helps with and can help with more if they have more money. And I'm thinking particularly along the coastlines where you get a lot of North Africans in leaky boats ending up, in southern Europe and causing all kinds of problems there. So, perhaps, if they wanted to allocate and earmark their 5% toward creating a navy to patrol the Mediterranean, that would be fine. But they can't. I think it's really poor form that they do that. So I hope that their minds are changed. And I think there will be a lot of pressure on them to do so. 5% is a burden. There's just no question. Poland has led the pack. Poland spends more on security than the United States does, at 4.5% already, and the United States is about 3.5%. So everybody's going to have to pay more. In my country, Canada's been an embarrassing laggard in terms of NATO. Trudeau was just hideous toward the military and so on. So Canada has a lot of catching up to do, and it's going to have to do it, and people are on side with that.
Let's take a look at the situation in the Strait of Hormuz, because that's the subject that we covered here on TVP World on our program. What happens militarily and economically once it's closed, and especially considering the recent attack? Things are developing very dynamically right now.
Yes, I wrote a newsletter on my Substack called World War Oil, and it was in last week's collection of my newsletters. I write twice a week. And I've covered oil all my career as a business writer first years ago. And Canada is an oil-rich nation, as is the United States. If they are able to close down the Straits of Hormuz, and that's a big question mark because it's a very wide, lengthy strait. They don't necessarily have the boats or the manpower. I guess if they want to bomb everything in sight, they could do that. But that would really be I don't think anything they should dare do. They threatened to do it before. They couldn't do it. The U.S. fleet is there. Missiles are aimed at it. It would be very difficult. They would be interdicted quite horrifically. However, if they were able to shut it down, just blockade it somehow, even for a brief period of time, that would stop the shipping of about 30% of the world's oil, which flows through that strait to markets all over the world. Now, several things would happen and already have happened, which is why, even though it's possible that oil will be attacked in this way, the prices would go through the roof. They're about 78 now. They'd go way over 100 and beyond. Is that you've got the United States and Canada are now the biggest producers of oil and natural gas in the world. Then you've got the Persian oil states, and they can just flood the market to prevent it from getting so out of reach that a lot of poor countries will go bankrupt because they can't afford oil. And so this is what happened just before the war started. The Americans started to produce more oil, but the Saudis dumped a lot more oil on the market, which didn't allow it to go as high as it did until it settled down. So, that's the kind of thing that would happen. Now, the next thing is it would become a crisis, an absolute crisis for China. China gets 90% of its oil from Iran. And that's why China is putting all kinds of pressure to diplomatically solve the disagreements and so on and so forth. But, they're going to be the most victimized by all of this.
Mm-hmm. It seems to be gradually harder for Europe and the U.S. administration to find common ground, and we know that this meeting, the summit, which is set to take place from tomorrow onwards, is supposed to, in a sense, make Donald Trump happy. What's your opinion on this? Do you think that the European Union and other member states will be actually able to do it?
I think that's fine. I think it's absolutely going to be excellent. Mark Rutte was chosen to be the head of NATO because he's gotten along so well as a Dutch politician with Trump. Not that he has the same policy as subset, but Rutte has a relationship with Trump, and he's very diplomatic. Now, what I think all NATO members should do now that they have, uniformly agreed that 5%, with the exception of Spain, is the goal, they should absolutely allow Trump to take a victory lap. That was his idea. And he has been right all along for years that most of the members of NATO have been freeloading off the United States. That includes Canada and most of Europe. So, I think he should be given credit and plaudits for that. I think it actually represents a diplomatic victory for him to have done that over the years, battering away. So I think that he will and should come back as being as marking an achievement.
Definitely two very interesting days coming ahead. Thank you so much, Diane Francis, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, was my guest tonight.
Thank you.
And so this would be all for now here on World News Tonight. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Claudia Czerwińska, and please do stay tuned here on our channel, as we'll be back in just a moment with more news and features. And we'll see you there.